Hello, everybody. I'm Dennis Lyons, the editor of the Daily Item and the Danville News, and we're here today with Senator John Gordner, who is in a re-election race against Democratic challenger Michelle Siegel. As we are doing with all candidates for races in the state legislature, we are bringing our local candidates in to chat with us, and it's a pleasure to have you with us, Senator.
Thank you. Good
Thanks
afternoon.
for being here. I guess we'll start with a fairly broad question that hopefully you'll give me a fairly specific answer to. How do you think Pennsylvania has done from state legislature to the governor to local and county officials handling the response to COVID-19?
Well, first of all, there's no doubt that no one in our lifetime has faced this type of situation. So whether it's the legislature, and I've been there for 28 years, the governor, the Secretary of Health, none of us have seen anything like this that last occurred in 1918 or so. So, there's going to be some miscalculations, some mistakes, and hopefully we learn from them. Back in March, I remember, shortly after this all really sunk in, the General Assembly, the House, the Senate, Democrats, Republicans joined together, and I think we passed 5 or 6 bills unanimously, worked with the governor, got them to the governor, and again, passed unanimously. It was shortly after that, though, that things changed. And unfortunately, some 5 months later, there's not a whole lot, 6 months later, there's not a whole lot difference. And that's what our frustration is. The governor decided that he could operate on his own without consulting with the General Assembly, without discussing things with the General Assembly, and without taking in the viewpoints of the General Assembly. As someone who's a poli-sci and history guy, who's actually read the Federalist Papers and still has a copy of it, we've got co-equal branches of government. And, the House and Senate, the House is really close to the people. We all should be involved in the discussion part of this, and that's been the frustration since then. I'll mention a couple of specifics, and then I'll turn it back. But nursing homes, I think one of the biggest failures of the governor and the secretary, because Secretary Levine has the authority over nursing homes. The Department of Health does. When you go back to the state of Washington, where this sort of all really began, the biggest problem was deaths in nursing homes back in the state of Washington. And our Department of Health should have learned from that. But what they did was they sent people that tested positive back to the nursing homes. They required it. When I say they, the Department of Health required the nursing homes to take those patients that tested positive back. And that ended up being a disaster in a lot of ways. And it's really taken a long, long time for the Department of Health to really come up with different procedures. And we saw, Milton, what happened up there. It was just a disaster in regard to the numbers of deaths. And so that is a failure. And the other failure, and we could talk about this for the whole hour, is the inconsistencies. I think, and that's the biggest frustration with the people I represent and many of the districts like mine, the inconsistencies. Why can hundreds of people go into Walmart or Lowe's and Home Depot, and why can't 5 people go into a downtown store that may only get 5 people in a day? The inconsistencies. Why can the Carlisle Car Show have thousands of people come to their events, but you can only have 250 people at a 6,000-seat football stadium? It's the inconsistencies that are very frustrating. And the latest example are the restaurants and the bars and the taverns that are just being brutalized during this time period. So that's the criticism.
Obviously, as you well know, Justice Strickland in Pittsburgh ruled that some of these mitigation efforts were unconstitutional. The stay got turned down yesterday. The appeal is ongoing. And what do you think short term that means? The governor seems to be concerned that it unnecessarily limits his authority to take emergency action. What was your view of that decision by the judge?
We have had state of emergency orders allowed in our Commonwealth for decades. And in the past, they've been for a couple of days. Normally, it's a flood emergency, which we've certainly seen along the Susquehanna River. I've got Bloomsburg in my district. I, again, admired the flood wall here in Sunbury, and the people here should be thankful for it. A winter snowstorm emergency where it lasts a couple of days. But under this governor, we have had two of the longest states of emergency in our Commonwealth history. If people don't realize it, we are now 2 years plus in a opioid state of emergency. You're only allowed to issue them for 90 days at a time. The governor has now issued 7 of them back to back to back to back to back for a state of emergency. We've never had states of emergency that have gone on for more than a couple of days or a week. We're now on the 3rd state of emergency in regard to COVID-19. What that decision by the the district court judge out in the Western District said was, you know, you go way back to our Constitution, and before we could get our Constitution adopted, there had to be the Bill of Rights, because people were really concerned that that wasn't in the U.S. Constitution. So they came up with the Bill of Rights, and, you know, First Amendment, you know, has freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, all of those fundamental freedoms in there. And really what the judge's opinion, the 66 pages, if you read it, it talks about that there are fundamental freedoms that you can take away or control for a little bit of time in an emergency. Mm-hmm. But our forefathers never believed that you could take them away for an extended time period. And that's what this governor has done. And he also, again, if you read the 66-page opinion, talks about inconsistencies. Mm-hmm. How can you allow Carlisle Car Show and other things no? How can you say that, again, hundreds of people in a Walmart, but it can't be at a church on a Sunday? How can you allow thousands of people to protest in the street, and the governor, as we know, marched in one of them, but again, put other restrictions in place? And that's what the judge said was unconstitutional, that you can do it for a limited amount of time period, but it was never foreseen that it could go on for months and months and months and be so irregular in how it's done.
Well, we're recording this on Wednesday, September 23rd, and the State House has just failed to override Governor Wolf's veto of the bill that would have allowed the schools to control how many people they allowed at sporting events. So it feels like, to some degree, from my perspective as a parent and grandparent, that maybe we're spending a little bit too much time worrying about how many people go to football games and not enough about some of the things that are perhaps a little more important. We have parents who have to keep their jobs, who have kids who don't get to go to school. That's one of those issues that doesn't get a lot of attention, but is there something that the state legislature could be doing to help those people in that situation, whether it be relaxing some of the restrictions on child care providers, or something that will help these parents get through this tough time?
Well, look, we all have different opinions, and I still, when I'm in Harrisburg, I still like the hard copy of the daily item and the news item. I was just reading it today, and you guys, I think, have a little difference of opinions just amongst yourself. I read an editorial that was pretty positive in regard to the school issue, and then I read your opinion piece in the second section on B1 that basically said what you just said, that we need to be focusing on other things. But I'm disappointed in regard to what the House did today. When that legislation initially passed the House, it passed with broad bipartisan support, 155 votes altogether. And today on the veto override, it got 130. I think it needed about 135 or so in order to be successful. So 20 votes changed on that. It's amazing what we've done over the last number of months in regard to, for instance, getting federal CARES money out. Daycares, childcare have been dramatically affected. And as part of the federal CARES money that we got, we specifically drove money out to daycares and childcare entities to help them out. And with more and more moms and dads working from home, with more and more schools going with a varied approach to in school and out of school, the need for daycare and childcare is more important than ever. We have one of the biggest advocates in the whole state, and Representative Linda Schlegel-Culver, in regard to preschool and early learning programs. And we've actually invested more money over the years, but we specifically took, I don't know how many hundreds of millions in federal CARES money and directed it to it. So we have been doing a lot. You hear us complaining about some different things, but even the monies that we drove to each of the counties for their county block grants, and Northumberland County got $8 or $9 million in it, and we made them decide how locally to send it out. And they have done a good job sending it out to small businesses, to nonprofit organizations. But probably one of the most important thing, and I'm not sure that you folks know it, but when I called each of those sets of commissioners to let them know they were getting large checks, which all of them were shocked about the number on it, I emphasized make sure you drive out money to small businesses, make sure you drive money out to nonprofits. But I finished by saying broadband. If ever we're going to do broadband, now is the time to do it. And we put 7 specific areas that they could spend money on, and I made sure that one of those 7 areas was specifically broadband. And we have with Drive in Montour County an example as a result of Geisinger giving them money, figuring out how, in a smaller county, how to do it. But I'm pleased that each of the sets of commissioners have taken some of that money and decided that they're going to invest it in broadband. Most of them are working with Drive or CEDACOG to do that. But again, with more and more people working from home, working remotely, taking classes online, and maybe it's even college online, this is the time to get broadband done in the rural areas of our Commonwealth and certainly in our area.
Yeah, absolutely. David, broadband is sort of your issue, and I thought maybe you want to hop on there from there and go out of order.
There are a number of different options on the table for how to approach broadband, and I'm sure that you're very familiar with the situations and the hurdles that you face in the rural area. What do you see as the best way to move forward with broadband? Out of all the suggestions and recommendations.
Yeah. So, I mean, this has been an issue for a long time. And in the past, the efforts were to have the big communication entities try to do it. And they just decided that it was cost prohibitive for them to do it. And so at one point, and I don't know if it's still out there, but literally the federal government put billions of dollars through the FCC on the table. CEDACOG helped to advertise it, and I made sure that there was a bidding process. I don't know. I think 5% of the money ended up getting taken because folks just decided that they weren't going to take advantage of it. So the way to end up doing it is, again, I'm going to bring up Drive there in Montour County. Again, I'm sure you followed it, but Geisinger came up with some monies because they saw an advantage from their employee standpoint to get it to the remote areas of Montour County. I think they did it through hotspots to a large degree, and again, that's not something I was familiar with more than a year or two ago, but making sure that in different areas you put hotspots and provide that. There's been legislation that has proposed that we have considered in the Senate that would require an inventory of all state-owned property and determine where those places we've got Selinsgrove Center, we've got other PennDOT facilities. What other state-owned facilities where broadband could be placed on that facility without having to go through private entities or private licensing and those sorts of things? It makes sense to do that. We have state property all over the place. Let's find out where they are. Let's find out if they're in rural, remote areas, and let's put hotspots or other entities there. But I think that's the best way. And again, with this federal CARES money, the money has to be attached. What do I want to say? It doesn't have to be spent by the end of the year, but it has to be contracted for by the end of the year, and then I think spent by the end of February. So there's going to be an accelerated process of doing that.
About a century ago, the rural electric cooperative ran the lines, and there's some talk about that. Do you see that as a possibility
Sure.
as well?
Absolutely.
Making that same kind of effort.
Yes, we got to find relatively affordable and accessible places in order to put those. And again, with the newest technology, and in the past we always thought we'd have to put lines down, and you don't have to do that anymore. So use these hotspots and other entities in order to get to those areas and make sure they're distributed. But Drive did it in Montour County, and so it certainly can be done in northern Northumberland County and western Snyder County, other areas like that. Sooner rather than later.
Okay, Rick?
So many things to discuss, Senator. Let's talk about data. What sort of answers are you getting about how the data, including deaths and cases, are being reported? Since August 1st, the number of cases in Union County has dropped from previous days 12 times. This comes as the state highlights a metric citing 100 new cases per 100,000 cases as a measuring stick for school districts going online. Can you talk about the data that you receive?
Yeah, so we do get information from the Department of Health every day. I already received today's report on my way here, as a matter of fact. So we do get information every day. And we do get some, while it's smaller and it's down below, we get some, what I find more interesting data. Hospitalization rate. The hospitalization rate right now is the lowest that it's been in 3 or 4 or 5 months.
It's 420 today statewide.
And I haven't seen a 400 number in a long, long time. And I think that's something that's interesting. We had a surge in Bloomsburg with Bloomsburg University there for the last 2 weeks and the first week of, maybe the last week of August and the first 10 days or so of September. I mean, it skyrocketed, and they had to take some action in order to get it under control. And they, I think, now have 300 and some cases. And I just was talking to someone from Bloomsburg University on the way here. They still have 0 hospitalizations. 0. And I think that's true in regard to college-age students across the country. They're getting flu-like symptoms. So I think hospitalizations is important. Deaths are certainly important. And as we've found out, statewide, and I think it's nationwide as well, 2/3 or more of the deaths are among seniors living in assisted living type of facilities or nursing home facilities or some type of those facilities. And that's been true back to, again, March or April. And again, if you go back to Washington State, that, for some of us, that's really where the focus should have been on and needs to continue to be on. Those elder individuals with pre-existing conditions, and again, in a confined setting, is something that's very important.
There is a concern now about a second surge, though. It's something I think we all have to really be aware of. Across the country, we are seeing some increase in numbers, some hot spots. Maybe not here yet. So I guess we have to really keep looking at that data. Yeah, so, I mean... It's flu season again.
Yes, you're all wearing a mask. I wore a mask in. I was allowed to take it off because I'm going to be doing most of the talking. But I've been saying for months and months and months, I wear a mask. I actually do the grocery shopping in my family. I've done it for 28 years. We just celebrated our 28th wedding anniversary, and I've done the grocery shopping, and I've worn a mask for months and months and months. My wife and I both do. I believe that we should be following the CDC guidelines. We're all sitting six feet apart here. We should, in the elevators, I stayed overnight in the hotel. You're 2 people in an elevator. Please don't talk while you're in there. I mean, there's things that we can be doing that I call minor inconveniences. If we can do minor inconveniences like wearing a mask when you're out and around, doing the 6-foot separation, If we can put up barriers, I like most of the stores and stuff that you go to. In my office, there's a barrier. So if someone does come in, they're not breathing, towards, my clerk or whoever's there at the desk. If we can do those sorts of things, then we can make sure that we don't need to go back to the draconian measures that we saw back in April or so. So, look, I encourage people, wear a mask, follow CDC guidelines, those sorts of things. But, and you didn't ask this, going back to Shikellamy and football games, in a 6,000-seat stadium, I think you can allow 2 people per player or participant to sit, with mom and dad sitting here and then 5 seats away, mom and dad sitting there. I think there are still ways to do it so that life can be as normal as it can be under these situations.
Thank you.
Bill? I want to go back to disaster declarations. I know you support Senate Bill 1166, which...
Senate resolution.
Senate resolution, I guess.
Yep.
There you go. You talked about the 7 extensions with the opioid and now 3 on the COVID thing. Is there a way to balance that? Because in some regard, you could argue having the emergency declaration out there sort of hammers home the importance of the opioid thing, even 2 years later, like you talked about, and the COVID even now 6 months later. Is there a way to balance it with what he's trying to do and what you guys want to do to sort of work together a little bit more?
Well, let's take the opioid one just briefly to begin with. If I were to go and ask 50 people out in the street, are we currently in an opioid state of emergency? Right. I think 0 people would say it. And no offense to the folks sitting around the table, I'm not sure that all of you fully realized that we were still in a opioid state of emergency. So I think it's sort of lost the significance of it. I mean, it was significant a couple of years ago, and the coroner here in Northumberland County was one of the main people out talking about it because he was getting tired of the deaths, and so were other coroners. But when you do it time after time after time, I don't think people know that it exists and the importance is less. Look, in regard to the current COVID-19, our biggest frustration is not being part of the discussion point, not being able to be listened to. When the governor made his last announcement in regard to restaurants going down to 25%, he called all of us in leadership. There were, 40-some people on the phone call, and because I'm the whip, I was one of them. But House, Senate, Democrat, Republican, all of us were in a conference call, and we thought we were going to discuss this. But he dictated, I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm doing this. And we asked a number of questions, and he said, I'm doing this. We asked for data. What data did you get that shows that we should be doing this? And to date, they still have not released the data in regard to restaurants and bars. That's the frustrating part. And what the constitutional amendment, which we passed for the first time this session, frankly, we may pass it early next session because a new session starts in January. So it could go on the ballot next May. It says that, I forget if it's 20 days or 21 days, but you can do an emergency declaration for 20 or 21 days. And then in order to keep it going, you need to pass a resolution in the House and Senate in order to do that. In this case, we would have done that back in April and May, but we also may have put some provisions in there in regard to consultations to make sure that he's listening. And I'll just give one other example. They used to have Wednesday afternoon phone calls. They, I mean the governor and the governor's office used to have a Wednesday afternoon phone call with the highest House and Senate leadership. So Joe Scarnati and Jake Corman. Twice they had mid-afternoon phone calls, talked about it, and then within hours the governor did a major proclamation of which he never talked about during that leadership phone call, just hours beforehand. I mean, that's just not acceptable.
Yeah, and in that very seat last week, one of the things, Senator, you all talked about was the governor has to let Pennsylvanians, treat them like adults. Is that sort of maybe where you go as well?
So I think it goes back to that 66-page decision and talks about fundamental rights and liberties that go back to the Bill of Rights with our country. In that there's no doubt in emergencies that we want government to be able to, during the immediate aftermath of an emergency, to be able to make sure that things are taken care of. But you can't continue to trample on those personal liberties and those basic freedoms that were in our Constitution and our Bill of Rights month after month after month. And I think that's what the judge said. And he also, again, I'm being redundant here, talked about blatant inconsistencies. Mm-hmm. You cannot say this is okay and this isn't when they're basically a similar situation. So, you know, again, Carlisle Car Show, mm-hmm. What's the difference with the Bloomsburg Fair? You know, 1,000 people in a march, and there's Governor Wolf side by side with people he doesn't know. He was handed a sign by someone he didn't know. Why is that okay, but we can't go, for instance, to church 3 months ago and have 25 people or so in a church setting?
Senator, let's talk about Senate Bill 530. That is the protection for victims of sexual assault. Can you explain the thought processes behind the law and what is in place to help school districts enforce it?
Okay, so you're going to have to give me some more information on Senate Bill 530.
530 is the victim of sexual assault in schools. Would require schools to student convicted or adjudicated. Basically, you're going to separate the victim from the accused.
Okay, I think that was one that I'm not sure. Do you have the sponsor? Was it Mike Regan?
Yes, I'm almost positive it was. Yeah.
Okay, because I remember him talking about it. He had a very specific case in one of his school districts where the victim was going to be required to go to school.
That's exactly what it was. Right.
With the person who assaulted her, and basically under the current law, the only real option was for the victim to go to another school district. Mm-hmm. And that seemed blatantly wrong and offensive. So now there are larger school districts, and I remember him explaining this on the floor. Mm-hmm. If there are larger school districts and there are 2 middle schools, for instance, and they were middle school students, then you could send the victim to one middle school and the person who did the assault in the other. But if there's only one high school, it seems blatantly wrong and blatantly unfair to require the victim to be the one that has to go elsewhere. So that basically said that you ultimately side with the victim and not require that she on a daily basis, and it's normally a she, has to go to the cafeteria or other classes or other events where the person who assaulted her is going to be at. That's what I remember about the debate.
It does give the school 3 options. Expelling the student, transferring the student to an alternative education program, or reassigning the student to another educational program. So,
okay.
Do you have any idea how that would work around here? Because like you said, a bigger school district, it might work around here. We don't have school districts that have 2 separate high schools or 2 middle schools, and we do have some elementary schools that are going to be able to bounce some kids around. But how would that work around here?
Well, again, they'll have to find a way. But I remember Mike speaking very passionately about it. And again, if I'm the parent of the victim and I have to decide to take the victim with no fault out of the school district and move her to another one so that the person who committed the assault can continue to go to school, that just is blatantly unfair. And so when you commit the assault and you are convicted of it, and that has to take place in order for this to apply, then you need to face the repercussions of your action.
David, are there people on the...
There are.
that might have a question?
We have 3, let me open up my mics here. So we have 3 people, Leslie, Mike,
Leslie Temple.
Yes, oh, I'm sorry, yes. Leslie Temple, Mike Milosevic, and Harvey Edwards are all with us. And I can unmute everybody, which I will. And let's see, it looks like Harvey is ready to go. Harvey, would you have a question? And is that sound up? Can you sound up?
Now you might need to hear it.
We're getting your sound up here, Harvey, just real quick. Okay, let's try again, Harvey, go.
Good afternoon, Senator Gordner.
How are
A
you?
while since we've seen each other.
Harvey used to bring some students down to the Capitol, which I enjoyed. My previous chief of staff, Todd Roop, and Harvey had a good relationship going back to Susquehanna University days.
Oh yeah. We're next door neighbors. I have a question about the postal system. Pennsylvania's leading the suit against DeJoy regarding postal service suspension. Where are you on that? Do you support the fact that there have been some questionable moves with regards to the postal system, especially with this important election coming up in November?
Yes, not sure if I'm going to be able to give you a helpful answer on that, Harvey. I have read in the newspaper about the lawsuit that the Attorney General is involved with. I think he's involved with it with a number of other Attorney Generals in other states. It is nothing that was done with any sort of legislative input. It is something that the Attorney General is doing on his own under the auspices of his office. So other than what I may have read in the newspaper, I'm not aware of any of the particulars of it.
Let's talk about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative for a few minutes. I know you're opposed to it. You've said that it could cost the state thousands of jobs and hundreds of millions of dollars. What are some of your specific concerns with Reggie and the direct impact it would have on our community?
Sure, and I'm sure that Senator Yaw probably has some discussion points on that. He knows it better than any of us. Yeah, Reggie, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. The frustration again with us is that I don't know how many other states were part of it, 7 states, 8 states, something along those lines. In all of the other states but one, the move in order to become a part of it was done with legislative action. So the House and Senate in those states took up legislation in order to direct the governor in order to participate. Governor Wolf has decided under some obscure provision in an act that he has the ability through executive authority to do it. We have just recently took up legislation, and I think it passed with about 33 or 34 votes. I believe there were 5 Democrats that supported it. And actually, the Democratic chair of the Labor Committee, Tina Tartaglione from Center City, Philly, supported it. Because we believe that in order to do it in Pennsylvania, you need the House and Senate in order to vote and approve it. As I'm sure Chairman Yaw mentioned, without Reggie, we have still reduced our emissions or whatever those are by a greater percentage than the states that are a part of the Reggie system. And it's a large reason because of natural gas, doing that and coal facilities being shut down like the one that I passed on the way to get here. Washingtonville and Montour County is not operational really at this point. So we believe that we're doing it through alternative means. And Reggie requires a pretty substantial tax. I think they estimated $300 million plus in taxes on Pennsylvania consumers. And so for that sort of action, we don't think the governor should be the one to decide to do that tax, as well as to decide if he does do the tax where the money should go. We have the power of appropriations with the legislature. So that's our objection. And it was, again, interesting. We had 5 Democrats, including a number of Labor Democrats, because the building trades, are adamantly opposed to it. We have the largest construction project in the country in western Pennsylvania right now. I mean, think about that. The largest construction project in the country, a $5 to $6 billion operation with Shell and the cracker plant out there. First cracker plant west of the Mississippi River. Why would we want to take certain actions that are going to take away or diminish the largest construction project in the country?
I'm gonna follow that. I mean, is there a way to balance Pennsylvania's push, to maintain itself as an energy leader in the country and a healthy environment? I mean, I know you said that.
Sure.
We're reaching some of the emission goals now.
Sure, and I think most of us, and I'm one. I mean, I support a large portfolio of different resources, and I supported legislation that I think was 14, 15 years ago, that required the PPLs and the other providers to buy solar, buy wind, buy it's a hydro turbo, I think, type of which in water streams where there's a lot of energy, you can get power out of that. So I mean, right now there's a large solar farm that could possibly go in Montour County. Very large. There's some local concerns in regard to the changing of the landscape out there in a rural area. But we need a diverse portfolio. But we're blessed with the second largest amount of natural gas in the country, just behind Texas. And it's, for those of us who grew up in the 70s, and remember, license, based upon your license plate, you could buy on a Wednesday or a Thursday.
Odd or even, I remember.
Odd or even, yes, and I remember that. To think that we are now an energy exporter as a country, but it's amazing. Even as recently as I think 7 years ago, Pennsylvania was a energy importer. So people had to get energy to send it into us. And now, again, Pennsylvania is a large energy exporter. But I don't have any problem, and have supported efforts in the past for solar and wind and hydro, I forget what it is, with water, to make sure that we have a wide-ranging portfolio.
Senator, you mentioned a couple of newspapers earlier in our conversation having differences of opinion. I don't think any of the newspapers you would come across would have a difference of opinion on Senator Scarnati's lawsuit against the Lancaster media folks and a couple of their reporters and the Spotlight PA reporter, basically seeking about $6,000 for what should be public records of campaign spending. Scarnati stored his records with the Dubois accounting firm, Clyde Ferraro and Company. And his campaign basically tried to charge initially $2,000 and now is seeking, I think it's $5,000 for the work that the accounting firm did and another $1,000 for attorney's fees. This is supposed to be public information. It's not about newspapers, really. It's about the public's right to know and the ability to, the law says 25 cents a page. What is your opinion on that lawsuit?
So I haven't seen the lawsuit. I've certainly, I saw the article that the Spotlight did on it. We all file campaign expense records. Most of us file them online, so it's immediate that they're available. Back in the day, we used to deliver them to the Department of State, and then they had to input them, or you had to actually go to Harrisburg to get a copy. But I have done for years and years all of mine online, so I think literally the same day they're available to look up. Joe had all of his online. But the Spotlight entity decided that they wanted to look at each and every record over years and years of activity. The frustrating thing about the campaign expense law is, and the article that Spotlight did, was they did not uncover one illegal thing that Joe or his campaign did. They quibbled about what some of those expenses are and what they were used for. But with campaign expenses, those are not taxpayer dollars. What basically we believe, we're responsible to the folks who contribute to us. So when someone sends me a check for $25 or $200, I ultimately am responsible to those folks that I'm spending it in the way that they think I should spend it and that I follow the state laws. It was frustrating. I know Joe and his staff. That was a year-long plus process. I don't know how many dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of meetings on that. And they ended up writing an article that showed that he did nothing wrong. And the frustrating thing is, and again, and you're making me go partisan here for a second, but I just hear it from Joe. Is
the first time
yeah, it's not. But again, I know Joe, like Joe, he's retiring. But his complaint is, boy, I wish they would decide to look at some Democrats. They've done hit pieces on Joe. They've done a hit piece on Jake Corman, more recently about dark money. The dark money, I think the entity was raising a couple $100,000. This week, Democratic dark money bought $1.3 million of advertising in 4 of our state Senate races where we have incumbents. $1.3 million from these dark money entities. And as was mentioned at lunch by Joe and Jake, they expect crickets from Spotlight. Because they're not going to look at it, but they did pieces on Joe and Jake, and it's frustrating.
To do with how Spotlight conducts its business. I'm talking about.
But you have to look at that.
Concern over charging for what really should be public records. Now, and Senator Yar, when he was here, brought up a case of some not media person, but some other person who had filed dozens and dozens and dozens of right-to-know reports. Well, and that's unfortunate, and that's certainly not the spirit of the law. But the spirit of the law is that the public should have access at a reasonable amount of money. The 25 cents a page seems reasonable to me.
Yeah.
It shouldn't go above that, I wouldn't think, whether it's a media outlet or a private citizen.
Yeah, and I'm just going to respond with what I did before. All of us are required to file campaign expense reports. That information is public. It's easily accessible. You could pull up mine in 2 minutes. Mm-hmm. But what Spotlight wanted was every single receipt over years from one of the largest collectors of money in the state because of his position. And again, I know from what he said, it took hundreds of hours in order to get every single receipt that they wanted over years, and that there's a cost for that.
And there should be a reasonable cost for it, but it shouldn't be exorbitant. I think what he's after is exorbitant, but that's certainly a concern I have as an editor of a newspaper, that we can't get into the habit of, just because we don't want to give people something or because it's a pain in the neck, that we're going to start charging more money for it to make it cost prohibitive for someone who might not have the deep pockets to be able to spend the money.
And I think what I'll say is we used to have, maybe before you got here, we used to have one of the worst right-to-know laws and systems into place. And we made major changes. Boy, that's been, I want to say 7 or 8 years ago.
I think it's been almost 9.
That we did it. And I know, and you're an entity that has used right-to-know in a lot of good open way. PIAA is just one of the more recent ones, which I enjoyed seeing and reading. So, I mean, thankfully, we have done a better job in regard to the right-to-know law and opening things up.
Okay. Gentlemen, anything else?
Nope.
We want to thank you for your time, and we appreciate you being here and answering our questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care.